William Afton did not care about his children. William Afton did not care about any children. William Afton would never try to avenge his own kids. And that's a lesson in anaphora. Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Erin, and if you stuck around past the title, the thumbnail, and the hook, then you should stick around for the rest of the video as well. Oh, and subscribe if you're new. Now that we got the YouTube formula out of the way, let's really begin. What do I mean by anything I just said? What do I mean by anything I say ever? But that's a question for another day. Well, I meant it all quite literally. I don't think that William Afton ever had a motive for what he did, or at least not the motive that we all thought he had. If you're not familiar already, it's been long believed that William Afton blamed Henry for the death of his son, since it was Henry's animatronic that killed him. This blame eventually led William to enact his revenge by killing Charlie, Henry's daughter, outside of the first Freddy's location. Once he realized that the animatronic that had been found alongside Charlie's body, the marionette, had been acting differently, more aggressive towards night guards and protective towards children, William began to experiment with Remnant and Agony. He did this also that he could put his son back together again, a line spoken in the fourth FNAF game. Thus, William began his lifelong pursuit of luring kids into suits until he eventually lured himself into one and got spring-locked. There's some variations to that theory, especially once Sister Location is added into the mix, because there is evidence of Remnant and Agony experimentation all over that facility. But the general consensus is that William is trying to put his son, who I'm going to refer to as Dave, back together again. Not necessarily in a literal sense, but more so he wants to put the pieces of Dave's soul back together. This theory has a lot of evidence, and it worked really well in the context of what we were given when it was first conceptualized. However, it cannot be denied that a lot of it is relying on the fact that Scott can create a decent narrative. And we all saw the FNAF 2 movie. Either way, we have gotten a ton of new evidence over the past couple of years, and as nice as that would be to wrap it into a satisfying narrative for William Afton, we can't deny that we need to look at some of the newer pieces and reconsider what we originally thought happened. Let's start with the biggest issue that plagues the original theory, that it relies heavily on the fact that Henry was the sole creator of Fredbear and the other early animatronics. Sister Location was the first to rain on the parade here, since it deliberately shows that William was capable and in fact did build animatronics on his own. Since the blueprints that give us this evidence were placed into the game immediately following the conception of the theory I recently talked about, you would think that it would help to pull it apart faster, right? Well, the issue with this evidence is that it only shows us that William knew how to build the Funtime animatronics, which use a much more advanced and presumably newer animatronic technology than the spring locks. This means William could have learned to build animatronics from Henry while they were still working together. These blueprints also show us that William is now the sole owner of Fazbear Entertainment, meaning that time has passed and he's likely not working with Henry anymore. So altogether, we don't have enough evidence from these alone to say that William knew how to build animatronics back when his son died. Years later, however, there's even more evidence of Scott Cawthon retroactively telling us that William didn't have it out for Henry. Specifically, we have evidence to say that Circus Baby's Pizza World may not have existed so far in the future from Fredbear's. For one, the most recent movie showed young Vanessa Afton having an encounter with Circus Baby. This is significant because the Vanessa Afton we see is the same age as the one in the earlier clips of the movie at the FNAF 2 location. Additionally, the set dressing of the room shows us that Circus Baby was fully constructed by the time that the FNAF 2 location was open and the FNAF 1 location was in development. This means that Circus Babies likely existed or was in development at the same time as the earlier FNAF locations. Not necessarily Fredbear's, but at least the FNAF 2 one. Also, about that set dressing, that alone is enough to tell us that William Afton has been working on animatronics since at least the first Freddy's location. Combine that with the inclusion of Edwin into the storyline and evidence that the spring traps were likely his or his and Henry's invention, and it becomes difficult to justify blaming exclusively Henry for a project that seems very collaborative. And while Edwin would have already died by the Bite of 83, potentially kind of justifying blaming Henry, the existence of Circus Babies at the same time puts into question whether Dave was even the first kid to die. And honestly, I don't think he was. And I don't think Elizabeth was either. The movies obviously need to be taken with a grain of salt, but it would be really weird for Scott to put a specific date on Charlie's death, and for that date to be 1982. Mind you, one of the most lore-significant moments of the game occurs in 1983, the event that we thought set off everything else for the franchise. A year after Charlie's death in the movie. It seems very intentional. Not only that, but between the Silver Eyes, Princess Quests, and the puppet's continued appearance throughout the games, there's a strong emphasis on Charlie and her character that makes you think her death was more significant than the others. Not just because she helped gather lost souls, but perhaps because she was the first. Think about it. Scott exclusively tells this story to us by retroactively giving us clues and pieces of evidence to point us in a specific direction. He also gives us clues through repetition across different forms of media. If we actually go back and look at when the Bite of 83 was introduced in FNAF 4, we can almost see that Scott was trying to lead us away from the conclusion we drew. First, we have Sister Location telling us that William knew how to build animatronics, knew about Remnant and Agony, and built the Funtime specifically with kidnapping and murdering in mind. The latter two have always been interpreted as evidence towards William trying to put his son back together, but I think they may have been intended to be viewed more independently. If we interpret William knowing how to build animatronics as being a way of telling us he does not want revenge on Henry, then the inclusion of claws in the animatronics tell us that A, William's a freak, and 2, he might have just been doing it for the love of the game. Plus, the idea of Remnant and Agony was mostly conceptualized because of its inclusion in the books. There's more evidence in Sister Location to point towards William's sleep experiments in FNAF 3 than there is to do with anything with Remnant and Agony. After Sister Location, we get Pizza Sim, which just emphasizes Charlie's importance to the franchise even more. She gets a whole-ass animatronic to drag her back to the pizza place so that her soul can be put to rest. Baby doesn't even get that luxury. Baby just gets a few lines in the game. Charlie's father does a whole-ass monologue. Speaking of that monologue, it includes a line that's pretty freaking important.
Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound. A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
Obviously, it's interpreted in different ways, but we also see Charlie's death for a second time through Midnight Motorist. I'm sorry, what other characters do we see die multiple times? Not many. Really, really not many. And Charlie's one of them. And by the way, I want to throw it out there that I'm mostly making these conclusions because it's interesting to look at a different way the timeline could have gone than our original interpretation. I have no doubt that Scott definitely used bits and pieces of the original theory to shape what he chose to do with the franchise from that point forward. But it's odd that there's so many contradictions to a widely supported and believed theory. We can't just ignore them or warp them to fit into it, but we should take a look at it from a different perspective. And by the way, I said all of that and didn't even mention that Charlie's death was one of the first ones we're actually shown in game. Not to mention that she stands out against the other characters in the Give Gifts, Give Life and Happiest Day mini-games. But what about the books and later installments to the games? Well, as for the games, we have the appearance of her dolls in Help 1 and 2, the inclusion of stripes on the security breach wiring, and her mask on the tangle. Though, I personally don't count that since it seems to be a result of poor communication between Scott and Steelwool. And by Scott and Steelwool, I mean Scott. She's also listed as the first death in the Princess Quest minigame of Help 1 and 2, and her music box appears in the form of Jackie's box in Secret of the Mimic. It's also worth mentioning that in terms of the first 6 games, the only ones she doesn't appear in after her original appearance are the 4th and 5th installments. She wasn't needed for the 4th, so that makes sense, and then the 5th seemed to be correcting some misconceptions about William's motive. So it seems like Scott needed her to come back in the 6th to remind us of her importance to the franchise. like she was intended to be something way more than we originally thought. But that's just speculation. As for the books, Charlie is literally the main protagonist of the Silver Eyes. The puppet also appears throughout the other books, but I don't know what to extent because I didn't read them. Shout out to Mason, though. He got me the first Fazbear Frights graphic novel, so we stay learning. Either way, from what I know about the books, or at least the Silver Eyes, is that the only relevant Afton kid that appears is Elizabeth. Huh. That's weird. The kid who supposedly caused all of this doesn't even appear in the books. That's odd. That's suspicious. Instead, the books focus on showing us just how terrible of a person William Afton is. It tells us that he does everything out of sadism and jealousy of Henry's perfect life and family. But do we see these traits of William anywhere else? Is there additional evidence outside of the books to tell us that William Afton did not do anything out of revenge? Yes. It was one of the most central elements of the most recent game. So much so that people thought that Fazbear Entertainment stole everything from MCM. William is a businessman. Business is about competition and control. MCM had too much control, which reasonably spiked jealousy in William Afton and prompted him to slowly acquire the entire business at one of the lowest points in Edwin's life. Ouch. Secret of the Mimic laid out that William Afton was always a shitty person, putting business above his own family and purposefully hurting people to get his way. Because of this and the confirmation of the MCI death order among everything else I've already listed, it just makes more sense for William to have killed Charlie before anyone else out of some level of jealousy for Henry, whether that be his family or his work. And honestly, knowing that William was at a very basic level neglectful, it makes sense that he would spend more time blaming others for his failures than actually taking accountability and trying to right the wrongs he's created. I mean, 2 of his kids died because he wasn't watching them, and he flat out sent his third to go die as well because he didn't want to deal with the consequences of his actions. And if Baby existed before Dave even died, perhaps Henry wasn't even the only one. The idea of a perfect family might have been driving William mad. Also, if you look at the line, "I will put you back together" on a more symbolic level, you could almost make an argument that it's less of putting Dave back together and more of putting the image of his child, the image of having a perfect family, back together. Even if you stretch that idea further and look at it from the perspective of the immortal and the restless and the line that the baby isn't mine, you could almost see that as William disowning the family he made and trying to reconstruct one. I think the Mimic story is probably meant to be taken literally, but if you want to look at it from the perspective of it reflecting the Aftons and how they behaved, especially since it is a theory that MCM is what actually happened and the games we play are just games in the universe, then maybe we're seeing again that William didn't actually care about his family, but the image of one. The Mimics are perfect versions of humans in a way. Think about how different Mimic Fiona acts from actual Fiona. The Fiona we know as a human was strong. She didn't put up with Henry's bullshit, but Mimic Fiona? She was the perfect housewife. And I think that's on some level what William wants. He wants a perfect family. He wants a perfect reputation. He wants to be the businessman with everything. And when he's not, he takes it from others. So, to conclude, instead of Dave's death setting off a series of revenge that lasted years and prompted everything else in the series, William's own apathy towards his own family and his idealized version of them prompted him to kill Charlie in a jealous rage. This is especially supported by the fact he was drunk. But William doesn't stop there. William starts to take out any child he sees. Why does everyone else get to have a perfect family and not him? He keeps going until his own neglect catches up to him and Dave is killed in the very location that he has been killing at for months. This stains the family image, prompting William to try to put it and the idea of the perfect family back together. Eventually, he finds out about Remnant and Agony and blah blah blah. His own actions catch up to him and he gets springlocked. I don't want to get into the bits of that because I don't really care about them. That's not the point of the theory. The point is, Charlie died first, and William wasn't a good father. He wasn't even a good person. The only thing he cared about was his business and reputation. Like I said, I made this theory because I think exploring alternative pathways of where the lore could have gone helps to get a better understanding of what's actually happening in the franchise. Does that mean it's correct and that every piece fits together perfectly? Not necessarily. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Did I miss anything? Are there other possible ways to interpret the Death Order? If Sister Location existed alongside the other franchises, what does that mean? Drop a comment below, I'd love to discuss it. If you've made it this far into the video, make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss another upload. I plan on trying to keep a more consistent weekly upload schedule and playing around with the type of content I make, meaning that it won't all be FNAF theories in the future, but it will still be really fun. If you have any suggestions, let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback and what you want to see, especially if it's short form content, because I think that's really boring, so I don't really know what to make about it. Thanks again for sticking around to hear the rest of my theory, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!